For part 2 of our first lecture, right? So, what we're saying is it can all be very rewarding if you control the environment in a way that makes change less anxiety provoking. And this is part of being a skilled manager. And what we see emerging for managers, especially one of the most important managerial qualities, is turning out to be an emotional intelligence. And let's think about it. You know, emotional intelligence didn't really even occur as a theory, as a construct, until we get into the 1980s. So this is kind of a very modern way of thinking, and I know you guys are saying modern. 1980 was 40 years ago. That ain't so freaking modern, but big picture, it is kind of modern. And when you look at me, kind of modern as well. I mean, I'm only 62 years old, right? So, video time. If you haven't watched the video, watch the video, huh? Okay. And let's talk about potential. We have cat conflagrations here. Let's just throw something at Willie because he's being a turd. All right, there we go. So, human, social, psychological capital. Human capital, what is it? It's the productive potential of an individual's knowledge and actions. Notice the psychology department relies tremendously on productive potential, this human capital. We have faculty, tenure-track faculty, that have tremendous potential to do the most amazing research and train our graduate students. We have a whole new crop band of lecturers who are better suited to work in the classroom. And the potential can be exploited, right, to develop classes, to deliver classes in an ever-increasing effective manner. So human capital becomes kind of the wellspring of all that's good for a company. We have social capital, and this is where productive potential from strong relationships, goodwill, trust, cooperative effort. Often the idea of rewarding contracts to suppliers because they come in with the cheapest bid can be a horrendous mistake because it ignores this idea of building social capital between purchaser and supplier. It's psychological capital. So how do your employees feel? How are they treated, right? Think about the lecturers who've been told essentially at the last minute, and we're talking 5-6 weeks out, hey, you're doing online delivery. So here's a course that you've always taught in the classroom, and in the next 4 or 5 weeks, we want you to teach this class online. We want you to port it to an entirely new format, which requires significant changes in what you do and how you're going to do it, right? I mean, I look at some of the people in my department. They've had to redesign 2 different classes, 3 different classes. I've redesigned 4 different classes for this coming fall. It might be a shit show. It might be a real mess. It might work bitchin'. But, you know, to what extent do we keep our heads in the game and keep a good attitude and keep moving to get this stuff done? Look at Dr. Miller. Lisa Miller's got 5 classes that she's ported for fall semester. This is crazy, but we're going to do it. Because we got some effective leadership in the department that encourages us to do this. So we enter into this task with a certain level of optimism. Yes, I can do this, and I'm okay with attempting to do this. No days off withstanding, right? What's today? Saturday. What am I doing? Working. What's tomorrow? Sunday. What will I be doing? Working. Why do I do this for $58,000 a year? Yeah, if you want to become a teacher, I want you to think long and hard about that, right? I teach 9 classes a semester to make what, $58,000, $60,000. I mean, 9 classes a year to make $58,000, $60,000 with a PhD. If you're looking to make big bucks, you probably don't want to teach psychology. Now, positive psychology, shift in focus from psychopathology. This was a huge breath of fresh air for psychology in the 50s and 60s. How many of you have taken the positive psychology course? And you probably want to, right? So it was shifting away from how do we cure people who are mentally ill to how do we enhance the experience of life for those who are, I hate to use the term normal, but not suffering psychopathology, right? So we start talking about human strengths and potential, and we start investigating ideas like hope. If you take my Psych of Emotion class, we have a lecturette devoted to hope, exploring hope, right? Well-being. How do we enhance people's well-being? And notice that Ohio State has now developed the 9 wellness dimensions. And if you want to learn about those and learn to apply them, you might want to take Psychology of Adjustment that's offered in the fall. Contentment. How do you experience contentment? What makes us content? Learning more about that. Tolerance and developing tolerance. Altruism. So let's go down the list. Responsibility. These are the contributions of positive psychology. Citizenship and love, right? So these are the components. Now, historically, we have positive psychology on the one hand on this track, and then we have organizational psychology. And at this point, then, they kind of come together and they blend into like positive organizational behavior. Acronym, you know, the POB, right? So this is a study and application of positively oriented human resource strengths and psychological capacities that can be measured, developed, and effectively managed for performance improvement in today's workplace. So Luthan gives us this idea, but notice there's a hard edge to it. That is that this can be empirically demonstrated. We can measure this, and we can teach it, and then we can see if our teaching of it effectively improves it through repeated measure designs. So we see organizational psychologists as being heavyweight empiricists, ever so much empirically oriented as our social psychologists. So what about the Luthan Shoes model? Well, confidence, self-efficacy. To what extent does a person believe they can successfully complete a task and have the ability to successfully complete a task? This is really a great predictor of performance, right? Hope. Goal setting is both willpower, the desire to move in that direction, but the belief, the way power, that I can get what I need to do it, right? Can you generate optimism in your organization as a manager? And that is, expect positive outcomes for what will be done. Subjective well-being. Do people develop satisfaction and a style of evaluating their lives that generates satisfactory feedback? Emotional intelligence, and this has become the big one in organizational psychology, that we find success is strongly tied to emotional intelligence. And this is both my emotional intelligence, that is my ability to know what I'm feeling, to either enhance or restrain what I'm feeling in certain contexts, but also to understand others and create environments where people have higher level emotional experiences. So that would be the POB. Let's look at PsyCap, which is another new term, relatively new term. And this is psychological capacity. That's the individual's positive psychological capacity. Again, you can see the similarities across these different theoretical approaches. They're very similar indeed. Self-efficacy, I can do this. I'm the little engine that could, right? I think I can, I think I can. Yes, I know I can. We can make positive attributions of success now and in the future, and this is optimism. Persevering and perseverance. It's also being studied in schools for school performance, right, as young as grade school children. Of course, they sometimes call it perseverance. They also call it, I love the term, stick-to-itiveness. And why do some children stick to it and others don't? And how can we enhance people's ability to stick to it? And then resilience. How can people face adversity, pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and continue to persevere? Huh? So positive organizational scholarship, right? Positive, it's the elevating processes and outcomes in organizations. The organizational then, the interpersonal and structural dynamics, the context in which positive phenomenon occur. This is where leadership, this is where the managers really come in, is creating the space where people can have the positive experience. And that positive experience, but remember that we're in business to make money, to be successful, that the positive experience has to lead to positive outcomes for the customer, for the process, for the product, those 4 Ps. Huh? Scholarship, it's the scientific, theoretically derived, rigorous investigation of which is positive in organizational studies. And this might have to do with employee satisfaction surveys, etc. Something we're going to learn to produce in this course. And that's where learning comes in. Because as John Wayne said, as many other people have said, life is tough. It's tougher if you're stupid. And if we want to play stupid games and we want to come from stupid, historic, positions and points of view and not improve our processes, we don't necessarily get to expect positive outcomes in that regard. So let's make it easier on ourselves. Let's put in the hard work to learn to continuously improve and reap the rewards from having done so. So organizational behavior, as promised, defined, it's the interdisciplinary field dedicated to better understanding and managing people at work. It operates at 3 levels. We can study individuals and individual processes, right? We can study these phenomena at the group or team level, and I've kind of set this course up to exploit the group or team level. You will be operating in teams for the most part, and your teams and your experience within the team become an additional object of analysis, an additional learning opportunity, right? We're going to see how that works because we're going to be challenged this semester being in this virtual environment. But that's the future anyway, so we're going to figure this shit out, and it may be a struggle at times, but we're going to continue to communicate and figure out what works and what doesn't for us in doing this. And then at the organizational level, and this might go all the way up to what I was doing initially in the beginning, pitting United Airlines against U.S. Airways. And Annika is about to attack Lucy again, so she can take one of those. Why do we need to study this? Well, it's the advent of union and collective bargaining began the study. Before unions, in the Industrial Revolution, life kind of sucked. I mean, you stood out in line, and then, if they needed you, they'd bring you in, and they'd work you to death, and if you didn't like it, they'd say, screw you, get out of here. You're fired. If you complain too much, you're fired. Because they had 10 people waiting out in line for your job. But once unions came around, then the protection caused management to step back and begin to change their practices. So unions have been a very positive force in the history. Now what you think of unions now, that's up for grabs. There's pros and cons, there's good and bad. That's beyond where I want to go. Now, when Hawthorne started studying phenomenon at General Electric, he observed that people perform better than when they were actually being observed, because it was like someone actually cared about what they were doing. It was detrimental to a study, and that's why they called the Hawthorne effect, that merely being observed changed what was being measured, and that's something that we don't want to happen in empirical research, hence the Hawthorne effect, right? So Mayo and Follett came along, and they said, man, we've been whipping and pushing people to do a good job throughout, industry, and now what do we see? Well, any of you that know anything about mules or donkeys or whatever, you can stand behind a mule and you can push it all day long. You might not move it an inch, and you might get kicked for your trouble. If you really want to move a donkey or a mule, what you do is you walk out front and you produce a carrot and you say, hey, you want this carrot? Come on with me. So the push philosophy is standing behind, pushing, threatening, right? Presenting an incentive, a carrot, and leading someone is the new style that we want to move to, right? That is leading through incentive rather than pushing through threat. And I want you to think about your own workplace experiences as we move through this class and what's worked for you or what hasn't worked for you. So, we then see McGregor come along, and he compares Theory X managers as evil, right? And Theory Y as a vision for the new manager. And again, we're going to do a quick comparison there. And there's Douglas McGregor. What did he tell us? Theory X managers operate theoretically, or operate from the point of view that people dislike work. And imagine, if your boss thinks you dislike work, how might that affect the way they treat you? Perhaps more as an enemy that needs to be prodded than a resource that can be encouraged, right? Actually, I think that work is a natural activity. I'm down with McGregor. I agree that work is a natural activity. I'm more happy when I work. I have better positive psychological outcomes when I'm working. And I want to give you a quick example. When I was a kid, we used to get together. There was 4 of us that were around my grandmother's house in Pasadena, California. And our big mission when we were kids, 8, 9, 10 years old, was to get some parent, someone to drive us somewhere so we could go have a good time for the day. And one of our favorite places to go was a place called the Eaton Canyon, which was a county park, and it was in the foothills of Pasadena. And basically it's kind of that barren high desert landscape, and there was this huge dry creek bed, huge, hundreds of yards across because it could flood, but then there's a small creek that usually ran. And more often than not, if we got someone to take us to Eaton Canyon, the 4 of us would spend the day trying to build a bridge across the creek with rocks. That's what we would do all day long, is collect rocks, because that's all that was around there, so you have unlimited raw material, and we'd place a rock, and we'd place a rock, and we'd place a rock, and we'd place all these rocks, but then the water would just go higher over the rocks, so it was an impossible task, but we'd spend all day doing that and have a great time. Work is a natural activity for us, being busy like that. As long as it's something that we chose to do and we like to do, it's a natural activity. When we're forced to do something to earn a living so we don't starve to death and we don't like what we're doing, then work becomes less of a natural activity. So people then, to the Theory X manager, think that people need to be forced to work. They got to be pushed to work or they won't, right? Well, people committed to objectives are capable of goals and self-direction. So the OSU psychology department, these are the organizations in which I'm embedded, and we have to deliver these products to the student. That is this educational product that I deliver. And they say, Mark, we want you to deliver this educational product. How you go about it, how you do it is largely up to you. So get busy and make it bitchin' for the students, as bitchin' as you can. And I'm like, okay, man, and I'm committed, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to direct myself, right? Because the context supports that type of thinking. Now, Theory X is most people prefer to be directed, and some people do prefer to be directed. That's not, but many people believe that we're capable of self-commitment. And with the appropriate rewards, we become even more in line with that philosophy. Although I'm not big on extrinsic rewards, and we'll talk about that a little later in the course in the lecture on rewards. Right? Employees can learn to seek responsibility, and often do, if they're rewarded for having done so. And notice it doesn't necessarily have to be a financial reward. Employees typically have imagination, ingenuity, and creativity. And in our teachers' meetings, we've been having a teachers' meeting every Thursday, a Zoom meeting for the lecturers. Dr. Cravens Brown has been running this meeting because she's, kind of ultimately our supervisor. We've all been attending this meeting on our own. Why? We're not paid to do so, because we get to learn how everyone else is approaching this transition to online education. It's a wonderful time, and there's anywhere from 12 to 20 of us getting together in our Zoom session, sharing our ideas, talking about what we did. Many of us taught over the summer, so we're able to say, hey, this is what I did, this is what went well, this is what went wrong. But we do this, and we learn from each other because we want to do it better. So we want to demonstrate ingenuity. We want to be creative about it. Now, earlier I called myself a Deming disciple, and I want to talk about W. Edward Deming. What can I say about W. Edward Deming? He's an American treasure. How many of you have ever heard of W. Edward Deming? And like if they're in the class, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you've heard of Deming, and we'd have like maybe one person raise their hand because no one's heard of Deming. And where did Deming come from? Well, he was a he grew up in Midwestern farms. That was his community. And he went to college, and he put himself through college, and then he went to graduate school, and he's a statistician. He's probably one of the best organizational psychologists ever, but he was never trained in that. He's a statistician, right? And come World War II, we had to do this crazy thing of ramp up production. We were the Allies' arsenal. So tanks, trucks, anything, cooking utensils, whatever it is that armies needed, whether it was the Soviet army, the British army, the American army, we produced it. And we had to produce like we'd never produced before. And Deming went in and helped people set up production facilities. He instituted statistical process control, right? He's a father of modern quality control improvements. he cut his teeth on wartime production. He took all that academic theory and put it into practice. Well, after the war, when Japan had been basically bombed into the Stone Age and had no industrial facility left whatsoever, General MacArthur was charged with helping to rebuild Japan. And he knew of Deming, and he asked Deming to go to Japan. He said, would you go to Japan and help me rebuild Japanese industry? And Deming's like, yeah, I've learned a lot, and I think that's the place I need to go to. And he did. And along with some really super heavyweight Japanese theorists and statisticians, process people, Deming worked with them. He loved the Japanese. And to this day, believe it or not, there is an annual Deming Day that is celebrated in Japan. And the most prestigious award in quality improvement that you can win in Japan is the Deming Prize. And we've never heard of him. We farmed him out to another country, and most of us have never heard. So, Deming's major principles, and notice, this is the book for our class. This is the required text. Now, I chose Mary Walton because she interviewed Deming, and I think it's a more accessible way to read Deming. Deming also has original works, so if you become interested, you can look at those. And Deming also has, there's a Deming organization on the web that's devoted to educating people on his principles. Deming's major principles: hey, everyone in the organization needs formal training in statistical process control. That's the hard edge. And then teamwork, that's the soft edge. And we'll talk about that division as we move through. Helpful leadership rather than punishment and orders. Number one point, and I think this is so huge, and it demonstrates Deming's grasp of human psychology: drive out fear. Manager's number one job: drive fear out of the organization. Open the doors up to people experimenting and asking questions. Emphasis on process rather than production. If you continuously improve the process, the production takes care of itself. Elimination of barriers to good workmanship is one of managers' other primary